Are employers doing enough to engage kids at school and college? Employers have an important role in helping educate kids about the world of work. So don't start with corporate speak, don't start with selling your career opportunities. Help first, sell second. And this is the crux of the chat in this episode of the Employer Content Marketing Pod. I chat with Danny Heath, founder of YourGamePlan. YourGamePlan is a digital learning platform that helps students make the best decisions about their future when they leave school. We share opinions, approaches and tactics that will help your future employees take the right step in their career. Let's get on with the chat. Hi Danny, how's it going?
Yeah, good, Chris. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thanks for taking the time out. I know you're busy, but it's good to spend a little bit of time chatting. Now, reason why I wanted to have a chat with you is because I saw something you posted on LinkedIn recently. So I think I wouldn't mind kind of diving into that and continuing the conversation from that LinkedIn post.
Yeah.
But let's start off with talking about just a quick intro to yourself and tell us about your company.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, firstly, thanks for having us. I guess, yeah, the simplest way to explain what we do is to kind of take you through the journey as to why I decided to launch the business. And that was a mixture of, I guess, my personal experience and my professional experience. So I guess my personal experience coming out of school, albeit kind of 12, 13 years ago, was, I was relatively run of the mill from an academic sense. And I was kind of predicted to get kind of C's and D's at GCSEs. And whilst, my teachers and sixth form kind of heads were very keen for me to push through that further education route and head on to university, it was never really something I considered, largely because of my family environment at the time. I was in a single parent family with two younger siblings, and the idea of leaving them to go to university always felt a bit alien to me. So kind of when I did my GCSEs, I failed all of them. I think D's and E's were pretty much the grades I got, but I still wanted to pursue a professional career. So I was encouraged by our head of sixth form to come back anyway and do A levels because, they thought I was a bright, enthusiastic student and they wanted to give me that chance. But as I said, it wasn't for me. So when I kind of pushed back and said, no, I want to go straight into work, but can you advise me on, the steps I could take to enter a professional career? There was just no advice. It was, your best options is to go and be a tradesman. But realistically, if you want a professional career, university is the route you go down. So I kind of pushed back and went for 7 or 8 interviews for sales roles in media houses in London, because whilst I had no idea what I wanted to do, the idea of working in media, even though I had no idea what it meant at that point, was appealing. So I went to 7 or 8 interviews with the likes of, Haymarket, Incisive Media, Centaur, those kind of the national publishers back in the day. And, all of them were very nice. They said, you're very enthusiastic, you're clearly a bright kid, but unfortunately you don't have a degree. We don't, you don't really have a solid idea of the industry you're looking to work into. And frankly, your presentation skills weren't as good as they need to be. And what really got me was, well, how am I meant to know any of this if no one's willing to teach it to me? It weren't that there's no skills in school that I could relate to. And as I say, my sixth form, were very much kind of like, well, we can't really help you. So I always carried that as something I wanted to address. I was lucky enough to get a job in recruitment advertising around that time with Incisive Media. So for the last kind of 14 years, I've worked in that industry. I've worked for the Times, the Guardian. I've been lucky enough to launch some job boards in the US, in New York for a while, which was nice. But the last 7 or 8 years have been exclusively around early talent recruitment, working for the likes of Milk Round and the Tab, effectively helping FTSE businesses hire their graduate cohort with inevitably a focus around diversity and inclusion. And what really drove me into launching YourGamePlan was that, we were being given relatively big budgets to deliver inclusion and early talent. But to do that, we were just being asked to keep going back to the graduate cohort. Now, the graduate cohort is still predominantly white middle class. So if you want a societal representation in your early talent, you're not going to find that in the graduate cohort. You have to go deeper into school talent. And I guess when the government announced their apprenticeship levy, that was the final push that I needed to launch YourGamePlan. So YourGamePlan is a free-to-use platform for all schools, all charities, and all young people in the UK. Our target age group is 14 to 19. And effectively, what we've built is a digital learning platform which has 27 soft and employability skills courses on there. Things like, how to interview well, how to speak in public, how to handle criticism at work. We have stuff on mental health and lifestyle. And effectively, what all of these courses do is make a young person more career ready. A lot of it is boosting confidence around skills they already have, but they just don't know how to attribute it to employability. So we talk about how to transition your skills out of education into employment. Importantly, all of our courses are CPD accredited. So every time a young person passes one of our courses, they get an accreditation from the CPD, which they can use in our CV builder to kind of make them more employable and make their CV stand out a bit more for employers. So the general idea is to offer a universal training platform to every student in the UK. So there's no blockers around careers budget for schools or independent students' budgets for stuff like this. We've made it free because we want every student to have a fair chance.
That's good. Really nice. Yeah. So how long have you been up and running for?
So we launched the platform in August 2020. So we've been going around about 7 months. We're now working with over 600 schools, around 6,500 students, and we're seeing around 700 courses a week being completed on the site. So the uptake has been phenomenal, quicker than we ever dreamt, really. And we're trending to be in over 1,500 schools and over 50,000 students by the end of this year. And I think what makes that even sweeter, I guess, from our point of view, is we've kind of done all of that on a £200 a month marketing budget, because we have obviously bootstrapped as a startup. So we're now in a position where we're looking to raise money from investment. So we're really hoping to kind of put a bit of a jet back on that and really be able to push it out as far and wide as possible.
Lovely. And actually, we chatted on LinkedIn a few months ago, and got to the thing about, well, actually, let's do an episode together on this podcast. And actually, life got in the way, I think. But then I saw one of your posts last week drop into my feed on LinkedIn, and that's kind of what encouraged me to go, look, I need to get in touch with Danny. And it was, kind of really got me thinking. So you mentioned in your post had a call this week with a client, and they want to target school leavers for their varying apprenticeship, traineeship roles. 20 minutes in, they ask how many year 12s we have on our database, and that is what they're looking to target. And say, now this will not work very well. By year 12, the vast majority of students already know their path they're going to take, be it uni or not, and what industry they might work in. If you really want to influence school leavers into wanting to work for you, do two things. We could talk about those two things a bit later on, but I think what I wrote down when I saw this as kind of my notes, kind of in prep for this, is go early or go home. So kind of, why is it really too late by year 12 to have influence over people's kind of career decisions?
I guess so. I would relate it as much to a more widely known and understood market, which is the graduate space, which, if you ask any graduate recruiter worth their salt, they're influencing them from their first year. They're talking to them in their first year of uni and all the way up, because they know, if you want to start speaking to young people about wanting to work for you or wanting to work for your industry, then if you don't do that before the last 6 months of their educational journey, it is too late, because you've got pressure around exams, you've got pressure around looking for work. And I just can't believe, and there's a lot of research to back this up, I can't believe that anyone just sits there and goes, oh great, there's a job posting from a bank 4 months before I'm about to leave school. Well, that's completely changed my rhetoric around going to university or going to work in another industry. I now want to go and work in banking, because we're talking about young people who are at the point in their lives where they're being more, I guess, exposed to knowledge in every facet. And, they're making these decisions about their life journey all the way from 14 and up. So to expect someone to not have a structured path for themselves post-education is unrealistic. So I think I talk a lot about this concept of employers are arrogant around their own brand. And they're also kind of, in my opinion, miss this big point about needing to educate students on their industry and their sector. Because if you're an employer, you can talk to the cows come home about what you do and what your goals are and what your beliefs are. But no one is going to apply for a job if they don't understand the industry that it's in. You could
Yeah,
have the
true.
best employer brand in the world as a bank, but if people don't understand the banking industry, why would they apply for you? It's unrealistic to expect them to do so. And that's, I guess, my point about being too late to influence, because if you haven't, as an industry or as an employer, spoken to school kids from the age of 14, 15 about what a career in banking entails, all of the benefits of it, the kind of what clients you deal with, how it fits into the wider economy, if you don't educate people on the sector, then by the time you engage with them at year 12 when they're leaving sixth form, they still don't know. So that job posting or that targeted email isn't going to entice them to applying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and career decisions can be formed quite early on, can't they? As well, whether it's subconscious or not. So it's really important to start as early as possible. And actually, you're kind of paralleling that with graduate recruitment, and going into the first years to influence the first year is absolutely right. I think for me, what this touches on is, and you kind of already mentioned some already, is this thing of the companies relying on the kind of the marketing content that is, come and join us, apply for this program. But actually, how can you expect people to really do that when there isn't that kind of foundation of content and information and knowledge beforehand? It's relevant to, I'd argue, all levels of one's career, is that you need to make that first step or next step in your career. You need to have that foundation of understanding, which is basically responsibility of an employer or potential employer to actually communicate that. So this kind of one thing you did mention another thing you mentioned, your LinkedIn post, was this thing about stop talking to them about your company. They don't care. They won't care until they understand the industry you're in. So I found that really interesting, because for me, that resonates for me, because it is ultimately what content marketing is about. And, providing that information, that advice, those stories, that inspiration, that help. And help can be seen as quite a boring word in marketing, but it's true, is that content that's going to help someone make that informed decision, especially when they're trying to figure out what to do in the first step of their very long working life, for sure. So I suppose, is there anything else you want to add to that, in terms of why it's important for companies to talk less about themselves and talk more about the things that their potential employees might need to know about?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably talk to you for about 7 days about it, but I think the key things are, it's understanding what your target audience cares about. So, one example I remember seeing not too long ago, and I won't mention the name, but they were a British-based energy company, and on their early careers marketing that I saw was a message from the CEO about their strategic goals as a business in emerging markets, particularly around Western Europe. Now, I sat there and thought to myself, I've been around recruitment comms for years. I know what they're trying to do. But the fact that they're targeting this to 17 to 21-year-olds was just bonkers to me. Because if I was 17 going into the world of work for the first time, what do I care about? I care about the culture of the business. So the dress code, the hours, the social aspects. I care about my own career progression. I care about my starting salary. I care about how many other people my age are going to be in my cohort when we start working there. The very last thing on my mind is going to be their Western Europe expansion or their new innovative ways of cleaner energy. Because, in a very simple term, they need to know what their personal life is going to be impacted by. They need to know where they're going to work and the kind of people they're going to work with, and what personality types excel in these areas. And I just don't understand the rhetoric of thinking that, when you look at priorities for a young person, you have to look at what does it matter to me? How do I feel about my change? And I think I used this term before about employer arrogance. Like, that's way too nuanced what they're talking about at that point, because emerging markets, whatever you're talking about, whatever new innovations you're talking about in energy at this point, as a 17-year-old, it's very unlikely I'm going to understand how energy works, full stop. So that the absolute first points of communication here need to be, on a day-to-day basis, this is how our company operates. these are our clients, these are who you will be speaking to, and this is our objective we're trying to achieve on a very basic level. Now, if you go any deeper than that, you're going to just knock off a large percentage of the talent pool, because they're just going to feel too silly to apply for the job. Because as you and I know, or anyone listening knows, I'm not going to go in and sit in an interview for a company I don't understand, because I don't, you're going to feel silly, you're going to feel stupid. So it's about humanizing your company, translating it in a way which makes sense for young people. And we hear this from our school partners all the time. We hear them, we get requests from them, can you explain this? Can you help our students better understand this? And that's because the information out there largely on companies' websites is just mind-blowingly confusing. And we can talk about specific industries, but particularly if you're talking about in-depth financial services or legal, some of these websites, I've worked in recruitment comms for 14 years, and I go to them and I wouldn't know what I'm applying for. So for a 16-year-old to sit there and look, particularly when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, particularly when we're talking about lower socioeconomical backgrounds in deprived areas, they don't have the family network to ask them to explain it. They don't have the network of friends or professionals to go, well, actually, the idea of banking appeals to me, but looking on this website, they're talking about derivatives and stocks. What does that mean? So you just block out this massive potential market of talent, because we don't understand that they're not in a position to understand what employers are saying, I guess.
But even if someone does have that kind of support network of knowledge about certain professions, there's very likely you're going to have someone who actually applies to go into a profession because that's what their family have done, and that's their only reference point, and they end up doing something. I mean, how many times have you heard someone go, well, it's the right job, I make money from it? But it's not too much to ask to have more people in the world that actually love what they do, and that really starts right at the beginning, doesn't it? So
and I think that comes largely from how poorly budgeted schools are for careers. We saw a survey recently from the Careers and Enterprise Company, that are a government-funded organisation via the DWP, who are responsible largely for ensuring that schools do a better job around careers. And they surveyed 750 schools. 35% of them have zero budget for careers, and 68% think they don't have enough budget to do their job properly. And that's just scary, because when we're talking about socioeconomics and creating a fairer society, how can we, if we're not even giving budget to schools to educate students on career options? So all of a sudden, when you look at the fairness at the first stage of these young people's life cycle around employability, they're already at a massive disadvantage. And one thing that really blew my mind, and we're actually, not that I want to plug this too much, but we're launching a platform to address this next week. But I found out quite recently that there isn't a single platform that schools could run a report or search for which local employers are offering work experience. So if we consider work experience to be the first real engagement with employability for young people, there isn't a platform that a kid, in a school in Dagenham could run a report and go, oh, I wonder if any banks in Canary Wharf are offering work experience. So even if they had the mentality, if they wanted to forge that path for themselves, they don't even have the tools to do it. And so if we isolate work experience as the absolute beginning of the employability journey, we are already in a who you know bubble. So the privilege is already so strong in that point of it that, that's only going to be strengthened throughout those stages of employability. So I think employers just need to do so much more in reaching out to schools and students and talking to them about how they can help them from a very young age understand their careers, so then they can look at forging a career path into it.
What does that look like in terms of what employers should be doing? You mentioned like going into schools, but kind of what kind of, if it's to have some things that maybe someone could start thinking about if they really aren't doing this at the moment, what kind of tactics could they use if it fits in with their broader strategy?
Absolutely. I guess the first thing I'd say is to cite the platform we have launched, which is, it's an employability hub which we're building for every county in the UK. And there's a lot in there, but I guess in the premise of this conversation, the main thing that it will do is it allows employers to upload their work experience opportunities. and then we push that out to our schools network, so teachers can run reports around all of the companies within a 30-mile radius that are offering work experience, which they can then sit down with their students and they can apply for that work experience via the platform. So what we've tried to do is build something that connects local employers with local schools to kind of encourage more communication around that. So that platform is, as I said, it's going live next week on the YourGamePlan platform. But other than that, I think it's just outreach and engagement with local schools. And maybe, you know, if you've not got a big resourcing department, or even if you have and you're too stretched, just pick one school. You know, let's start it. You know, you don't have to, you know, if you've got 25 schools in your local area, we're not saying you have to reach out to all of them. That's obviously unrealistic, but pick 2 or 3. You know, and get in touch with the careers leaders there and say, look, you know, we're X company. Every year we've got the capability to bring on 10 or 15 work experience students. At the moment, that's largely based on, you know, the network of our staff. But what we'd like to do is open up to a more diverse audience. So, you know, could you please promote it to your students? Because, Chris, I tell you what else that I was surprised at. Work experience is solely managed by the students. Largely, the students have their own responsibility to find work experience. So if we don't help schools help them, you know, there's just a massive gap there in terms of connecting young talent to employers. And work experience is such a great way for young people to get a sense of industries or companies, and, you know, just a sense of what kind of employment they might like to go into.
And so let's say if we go into a school, or, you know, or schools, depending on you know, resources and everything, and availability, and, you know, time and budget, etc. But if they were to, I suppose, what is, in your experience, kind of what is the typical things that the employers do, and in fact, what should they do instead?
Well, to be honest, I don't think employers do anything about work experience at the moment. It's certainly nothing I've seen on a scale that, you know, I'm sure there's isolated incidents that people can talk about their experience and their advice, but, you know, it is just something that we seemingly as an industry have just not addressed. So I think, you know, one thing that has come to light as a result of COVID is how digital meetings and digital communication has become second nature. I think we all agree that won't go away. So, you know, you could really see a position where, you know, via reaching out to local council or local enterprise partnerships, LEPs, or through the Careers Enterprise Company, who, if there are any employers listening who want to speak to more schools, they're a great resource. You know, you could really be in a position quite easily where, you know, as a resourcing manager or an early talent manager at a business, by reaching out to the council, you could have, you know, 10 or 15 careers leaders from your local schools on a call, you know, pretty quickly, that would last half hour, where you would just talk about your opportunities, and then you're engaging with that massive community. And obviously, you know, you're going to have to manage that in the right way, but it's easier than ever now, I believe, largely because of what we've been going through societally, to reach out and talk to people, you know, in groups, and really open their eyes to stuff that they maybe haven't seen before. And, you know, and that then leverages out. It's not just work experience. We could be doing this around mentoring. You know, we could be doing this around so many other aspects that I think let's use the hand we've been dealt, which is, you know, being able to engage with more people in a from a second nature point of view. Now, I guess, like, digital meetings and this engagement is so second nature now that it's time for employers and schools to really harness that.
And say, if, you know, so instead of looking at just doing, say, if we're thinking about a presentation or a session that's going to be run, whether it's, you know, online or face to face or in person when it can be, because we've got the classic thing of, well, this is, you know, talking about the company and this is why you should join us. But I have a feeling you probably would have a suggestion of doing that, something like that, differently.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think that conversation would be largely, you know, don't talk about your company too much. You know, talk about, you know, when you have those young people, or even the careers leaders. And actually, I'll give you an example of a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago, which really made me think. I said to someone, my biggest fear for the next generation of workers is if you lined up 100 18-year-olds and asked them to explain fintech, which will arguably define the global economy for the next decade, that I don't think more than one of them would know what it meant. And the person I was having that conversation with said, well, the scarier conversation is if you lined up 100 careers leaders in schools and asked them to define fintech, none of them would know the answers either. So I guess what I mean by that is if you're a bank, an investment bank, or anyone in professional services, you're going to be defined largely by fintech and the changes in that sector. So that's the conversation you should be having with careers leaders and with schools. You should be saying, we're a bank. You look at us as a bank, but actually, what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years is our sector is going to be revolutionized by technology. This is what it means in layman's terms. This is explaining it in a really basic way. So then, when a student says to that careers leader in a couple of years' time, "Oh, I'm interested in going into banking or fintech. Do you have any advice, or do you know anything about it?" Then they'll be able to do it. I think we just have to let go of the fact now that the government is going to fix careers education in schools. It's not been done well enough for a while. The Careers and Enterprise Company are doing a really good job at changing it. But if employers want that next generation of talent to be educated about their sectors, then it falls on them to do that. And I think that is the biggest thing I've learned in the 7 months. It's only been 7 months, I grant you, but the 7 months since launching this business is that, the employers are the ones that will benefit from kids being more sector intelligent, I guess, from them understanding more about sectors. So I guess it should fall more on them to make sure that's done and stop relying on schools to do the job for them. And I know that comes across as a bit harsh, but the fact of the matter is, if you want a richer talent pipeline, you have to be the ones to encourage and talk about that.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes back to what you were saying right at the beginning. When in your own story, it's like, how are you expected to just have the answers?
Yeah.
There's this kind of, I heard it over the years where companies will go, well, if they're interested in us, they will find out about us. Well,
madness.
That's like that kind of that touched on the arrogance thing that you're talking about. So it's employers have a fundamental responsibility to actually help people who are trying to figure out what to do once they leave education, giving them that content that's going to decide what to do next. And relying on governments is going to be a tough one, isn't it? But I think ultimately if employers do more of that, then actually not only they're benefiting the schools that they're working with, the colleges they're working with, but they are going to benefit themselves because they will get more of the right people. We know how much it costs to hire someone, into say an apprenticeship program or a graduate program, and then to train them up, and then when they leave after 2 years, 1 year, 3 years, that's pricey. That's really when you judge a true return on investment, return on your marketing investment.
Absolutely,
a whole other subject. But doing that, there is a big responsibility for employers to do that, which comes across in the, as you say, the conversations they have in person, and see, because of the last 12 months, the conversations and the content they need to share, online as well.
And I guess as well, for me, one of the big points is, particularly when you're talking about your own sector, this is where I think the responsibility falls with the FTSE businesses and the billion-pound profit companies. If you're an engineering firm, let's just say your BAE Systems, you're a big engineering firm, you hire a lot of that talent. And you're sitting there going, well, if we invest £200,000 into the regions we recruit young engineers, well, we actually only recruit 12 of them a year. So actually that cost per hire becomes way too high for us to invest this money. Well, then start thinking about the positivity of your pipeline in 5 years. If you have more and more of those people in your communities learning the skills, even if they go to work for one of your competitors or a smaller business, at some point that will pay dividend to you, because you will have a richer pipeline in that community to attract talent to when talent's more expensive. So, not only are you doing the right thing, you supporting young people in schools, but you will reap the rewards yourself. You just need to see, I go to wood through the trees around when that's going to happen. And I think, sooner or later, and I think, I guess I didn't realize how severe this was until quite recently, and how so many businesses are so short-sighted about their talent strategy. And it's almost like, well, we're going to spend this money because we're going to get this many bums on seats in the next 2 years. Think bigger, because you will reap the rewards of that over time.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a challenge in terms of, looking at the wrong measures of success, but also that people are held accountable to the numbers of applications. Therefore, everything is kind of more in cost per hire, and everything is more based on transactional as opposed to long term. And then you have, people who are maybe could argue the early careers category, is for people who have maybe taken that as a step on to something else. So therefore the turnover tends to be higher. I was talking to Bob Atwell about that and saying, actually, you need more people to be able to take a kind of a longer term view on their career in this sector, as in in hiring early career talent, which is happening more, I think, for sure.
I guess I've always had that sense of I feel sorry so much sometimes for early careers managers, because you're right that they are judged on every cohort every year, so they, I guess, have less luxury to look at long-term solutions, because let's say you have a £750,000 early careers talent budget for this year. So much of that needs to be spent on attracting applications straight away. So, how much of that can you then say, well, we're going to put into a 3-year strategy? I think, and that, the example I gave there is probably a budget for a FTSE 250 company. So if you're a smaller business, your budget's a lot smaller. So, that's why I think that knee-jerk reaction of, oh shit, let's target, year 12s, because they're the ones that are going to apply in 3 months. You kind of fall into this cycle of, well, actually, if you invested a bit more of your budget 3 years ago, you'll be reaping the rewards in a much bigger way now. So I think it is just finding that balance. And I appreciate that's not something that's easily done. And it's easy for me to sit here and say, this is what you should do without the restrictions of budgets. But I think potentially, there's ways to look at getting budget for this from CSR, from that. And if I'm an early talent manager now, particularly in a large scale business, I'm sitting there going, well, actually, if I knock on our CSR's door and say that I want to fund some employability training in more deprived backgrounds and students that don't have any insight into our sector, not only do we reap the rewards from a talent point of view, but also from a CSR area, we're doing the right thing for young people in our communities.
Absolutely is, and that's it's about connecting different parts of a business together to saying this is going to benefit more than just one area. Employee engagement as well. There's plenty you can connect to employee engagement. So, but it can be a challenge to, I suppose, connect the dots. But whether it's go on.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I guess about brand marketing as well. Like, particularly if you're a consumer-based business in a region, right? And what I would say about this is, if you're an employer that's got a headquarters in a specific region and you're largely consumer-based as a product, so Tesco's is the most obvious example here. If you turn around to their brand marketing team as the talent manager and say, look, I'd love you to give me £1 million out of your £100 million TV budget that you have every year, and what I'd like to do with that £1 million is put employability training in every school in the region where our offices are. What do you think families, so mums and dads, are going to think of a company that is investing large money in supporting their kids? How you wouldn't have an immediate positive reaction to that brand, and why that wouldn't impact you on where you shop, for example. And now obviously that's a very high line example, but I'm sure people will be able to see the nuances around it. But so don't be afraid, I guess, to go to other areas of business and say, right, this benefits me, but also this is how this benefits you.
And try it with a pilot it with a small area, particular campaign, rather than trying to roll it out nationally, because everyone will be keeping their fingers crossed a little bit to hope it works, so you can start small, as you say, kind of going back to the thing about approaching schools, is like, just do a small number to start with.
Absolutely.
Don't try and seek comfort in the volume of people that apply. Obviously more seek comfort in the quality that comes through. So I know we've got a few more minutes left, so let's just finish off by who's doing it, what we're talking about. Who are good examples of doing it right? Who would agree with you going, yes, and I think we're doing some of this already?
There's not loads. It's particularly around the school space, if I'm being honest. We don't see much. There's some of the large financial services businesses who have, frankly, a lot more budget, are doing a fair amount. The actual one example in the early talent space that I think has been phenomenal over the last couple of months that I would mention is quite similar to what we're discussing, but it's Lloyd's Banking Group, and it's been managed by their early talent team, and Tash there. I was talking to her about Natasha there, and I've seen it live, and I just think it's incredible. It's called the Feel Good Festival, and it's for their graduate campaign actually. So it's not directly related to schools, but the content is so strong that it's the best example I can give. And effectively what they've done is they've built a festival of learning around mental health, about young people themselves, so that they're empowering, potential graduates to learn about the real key things in their lifestyle, that is being spearheaded by Lloyd. So then they can obviously trickle in information about their careers and stuff. But what I think they've done, which is just phenomenal, is they've turned around and went, this is the time to help people grow independently. And, if we are a brand that supports that and shows that we care about them, we will get something back out in the long term. So, it's, I guess, riskier because there will be wastage, because people might just utilize that learning and tools who maybe don't want to apply for Lloyd's. But when you're talking about being a brand that shows that they understand the current climate and the environment of what's going on in the world, and they've made their entire graduate recruitment campaign about the individuals and not the company, I think they've done an incredible job there.
Yeah, and I've gone onto their website, and it looks like there's some good stuff going on there. And actually, there's Accenture did Accenture Live, didn't they, back in October, November time. And also Morgan Stanley and the Grad Fest.
Yeah,
it's, I think it's what's come from tough times in terms of COVID and lots of challenges and sad stuff that's come from that. It has, I think, accelerated what companies need to do more of what we're talking about. And I think, say Lloyd's Feel Good Festival, and Accenture Live and Morgan Stanley Grad Fest. These are all things that I'm hoping very much stays, after we've got some sort of lid on COVID. And looking at the RAD Awards, there's, quite a few entries that are in there that include the Morgan Stanley, and, they've been nominated for the RADs basically. So fingers crossed we'll get more of the same, that's for sure.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll start, because all the examples we've spoken about there, whilst it's not a fault of those businesses at all, they are multi-billion-pound companies, right? So, and obviously they have the ability to push out these campaigns on a national scale more so than smaller businesses do. But, even if you look at those examples and think, how can we do something around that on a local scale, a much smaller scale and more cost effective, you can still do that. You can do that with schools, and you can, if your headquarters is based in Exeter, then you can do something like that on a regional scale, which will be just as beneficial. So I guess my biggest takeaway for employers would be, don't look at it and be like, well, if I can't do it nationally, there's no point doing it, because that's just simply not true. You can engage and put a smaller budget into a local area, engage with schools and charities and councils, and you can do similar things just on a more direct scale, I guess.
Well, with what Lloyd's are doing, it's, when I read what they say, so more than ever now, it's so important to take a bit of time out for ourselves. So we've built the Feel Good Festival with well-being at the forefront of our mind. Or you could do that at any scale, couldn't you?
Absolutely.
So it's you're absolutely right. More we see of this kind of stuff, the better.
Absolutely.
The more fun it's going to be doing, being involved in it, but also more importantly, we'll have less people like yourself who are told, well, you're not really that prepared for the interviews that you've had, because how would you know in the first place? So hopefully that changes more over the years, that's for sure. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Danny. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Take care. Have a good one.
You too, mate. Cheerio.
Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed what you heard, then please feel free to subscribe, and it would be awesome if you could leave a review as well. It really does help.